Synergy is a loaded word. We architects are always taught to synergize with everything around us, but we maintain a status quo on ownership of design. We always never, for me, synergy, and for us at MOFA, it's always meant synergizing with any and everybody, starting with the client, the people who build the project, the consultants. It's the shared ownership of design with all of them. And in this case, particularly this project, it is a story of not only sharing of ownership, but also mentorship. So I met Sri Rama Shankar Singh in 2004 when I was a young architect. We were doing institutional buildings for him. And during those institutional buildings, we would discuss the idea of art and architecture together, of how art can seamlessly become part of everyday life, of how art is not to be restricted in art galleries or museums, but is accessible to students on campus, to any and everybody who walks there. He would conduct these yearly workshops with sculptors and artists who would stay there for 2 months, create the artworks, and leave it on the campus. There was just so much of art there that we would keep discussing, and from creating a museum to creating some space which was more dynamic, the idea of ILA was born in 2007. ILA, which means earth in Sanskrit, also is a place where we decided that we would put it in a way that art and architecture would merge seamlessly, where he would bring in the art and I would bring in the architecture. The start of this project happened with this installation which we did on his campus. For a sculptor, Robin David, and for him, a sculptor park was created. We were also doing an institutional building and testing exposed concrete. So this was done as a sort of a temporary installation to test the concrete, to look at the finishes, leaving the planks somewhere, and a very dynamic sort of a space which was just put up there to discuss the ideas of what the future lies. By 2007, we had formulated the idea for ILA. And in that case, it was about the architecture that must not impose. It must serve as an open and unobtrusive campus for curated art and nature. This time, when the site was presented, Nagar in Manali is a house to the Nagar Castle, the brilliant views of the Dhauladhar Mountains from there, and a home to a Russian artist, Nicholas Roerich. Roerich was an artist, archaeologist, philosopher, and a writer, spent last part of his life in Nagar, dedicating his life painting about the hills, about the Himachal life, about the culture of Kullu, and he wrote a lot. So this entire project was based around understanding architecture from Roerich's eyes. The sketch on the right side was more about building on this hill, on this beautiful site, almost like an anthill, something that emerges from the ground and merges with the ground, with these eyelids into the sky. And that's a painting by Roerich on the left side. Constantly, we were testing, looking at how art and architecture can merge seamlessly together. The way Roerich would look at a Tibetan monastery with these stark forms sitting against the hills, we were constantly sketching the planular or the folded paper geometry of how the mountains or the hills, the way they fold and become in an abstract form, how that can be manifested into a space that becomes ILA, where the structure becomes an open canvas and it's filled with life and history of the Himalayas. The topography is steep, almost 45 to 50 degrees, and we did not want to create an ecological disruption. With a stepped approach, with mirroring the folding and unfolding of the local terrain, we worked out a series of these pods which would just sit over the ground with the water to flow and the entire ecosystem to remain and coexist with the architecture. Of course, a lot of drawings, a lot of technical work, which I'll just skip in this case, which I usually talk in colleges. It took years and years of putting simulations, modeling, computational modeling way back in 2008, 2009, took us about 3 years to come to an exact form, detailed working drawings that could be executed on site. Site was tough. You could work only for 8 months in a year because it would snow, it would get cold. People who were welding steel, the hands would get cold, so we had to stop work every 4 months, every year. It took about 9 years on site to build, to construct, and it got finally over in 2021 during COVID, when he and I actually sat there for 3 months and gave the final finishes. The interpretation, this was the interpretation finally, with the hills in front and these pods that just fold and unfold and take the light, the reflection, the colors of the sunlight, replicating the mountains that lie just across. There were a series of episodes or storytelling within that entire narrative of Ila, starting from the gate of confluence, which we call the road level entry, where you enter and you just see the open valley view. That would become the reception, along with a small kitab khana or a library, which was part of the reception, tucked under the roof. Also, there were 5 pine trees on the site, which we preserved as it is and let the trees go through the entire structure. The biggest challenge for us was to not only maintain the structure, but also make sure that these trees grow and remain alive right till the end and forever. Leading to the pods, which were sanctuaries like caves for art, an amphitheater where dialogues could happen, where music festivals could happen, and art could perpetuate. Coming down to an infinity pool where the reflection to infinity and the spiritual connection could be connected to the hills. The gate of confluence, inspired by the ancient Mauryan inscriptions or the patterns followed by the textile weavers of Kullu, was translated by him as a cotton screen jali. I had proposed glass here, an open glass, and I'm so glad that he replaced the glass with something of this nature, which becomes a lantern for people who walk on the street outside. And the moment you step inside, the shadows of the jali enliven up the entire space. He got the local artisans to put the threadwork, the Tibetan threadwork around the pine trees as a sacred gesture, as a respect to those trees which go through the roof of the resort, and the silent spaces under the trees for people to pick up a book and just sit and spend time with themselves. When I visited this, I was amazed to look at when the first sunlight came in and I saw these reflections and shadows. It was a reminder to the lost art and culture of Kullu, which you also see in the weave of the fabric as well as light that comes in. So the caves, the sanctuaries of modern caves that we call, were the lightweight steel frame structures with ferroconcrete, insulated spaces that would fold and unfold and would become open canvas for local artists to interpret these canvases, which he very beautifully got artists to interpret Rorik's art onto these ceilings as permanent murals, which have now become the identity of the place. Each pod carries a different theme, different artist that has interpreted Rorik's vision or Rorik's way of looking at it in a modern way, almost like a cave painting inside these rooms. The art is lived in. It's not curated for an art gallery, but every part, everything that looks right from the pillow covers to thing was handpicked and curated by the client. It challenges the notion of a static museum. Here the local artists hand-painted the murals, inspired by Rorik, ensuring that creativity, architecture, and daily rituals occupy a single, continuous field of life. The apertures to the landscape merge what happens outside in reality to the interpretation of art inside. For the people to see live every day the art that is replicated of these mountains and how they live in reality. It's a parallel injunction of the two together. These apertures that look onto the valley bring you down to an amphitheater, which very beautifully sits as a step terrace, where today the concerts happen almost like a jazz festival or a poetry recital or theatrical performances that are a constant part of the program of Ila. And if you log on to Ila Tree of Life Nagar, you would always find some activity happening at the resort based on the season and what is available. The infinity connection of the pool to the valley, where the sky reflects, and the infinite connection to the mountains. Also, there was a tree right next to the pool, so we bent the gutter so that the tree could survive and become part of the pool itself. So that little dent to us was an adaptation and synergizing with what is around. So synergy to us not only meant working with nature, but with every single detail. The artists, on the other hand, gave back. They took the plan and they interpreted it as a mural, as a permanent artwork into the resort itself. So this is what synergy meant. When we worked with the artists, they respected what architecture is, and they used that plan itself to build an art that is in their own style, in the Himachali style. And this, to me, is the biggest gift that I could ever get back for a project of this nature. It's the architecture of mentorship. It's like a journey for me, like an Eklavya, where I am sitting and learning constantly from this client, from Shri Ramashankar. He not only questions, we fought. We didn't speak for a couple of years in between. We had a lot of sort of ups and downs in this whole relationship, but after 20 years of this relationship, I am glad that something of this nature happened, and it has changed me and transformed me as an architect to look at architecture in a very different manner. A small video before I leave. A new term called surrealistic expressionism, which is what MOFA is going towards in future, where it's not what we learnt in our colleges, it's not what architecture taught us all throughout our life, but this collage, this abstract collage of things that you don't even imagine from various fields. What Akshay talked about yesterday, about multiple medias coming together into architecture and becoming one as one synergy. Thank you.